Thank you, Father Brian. Thank you, Manuel, for inviting me here to do the impossible task of trying to summarize the sort of state and trends of education in 10 minutes. So I'll just come right out and give my overarching theme because it's only going to be loosely connected to everything else I say. Through teaching and learning, education is an open embrace and a positive attitude towards the unknown, which is that which is beyond our current state, and realizing the historical traditions and allowing for unwitting mistakes of the past to have happened, but always looking forward to progress the understanding towards truth. To this event, I love that there is a truly intergenerational transfer of knowledge going, and I believe, especially here in Berkeley and with the traditions that we've had over the decades, that it is only through that intergenerational transfer of understanding of knowledge that we are going to progress with hope and positivity. So I hope as we move forward that this talk, which I just have some sort of bullet points because as I was sitting in the back listening to everything, my biggest fear came out, which is that I'm going to get accused of plagiarizing what was already said before. There was talk of education throughout this entire conference. So I had to sort of rework what I was going to say. But here's the general overview, since I'm unknown to most people here. A little bit of my education, because I understand trends in education through my own education and through my own professional sort of pursuits. I want to give some broader trends that I see happening. Mostly I'm going to be talking about the K-12 system, because that's really where I've been focused for the last about 3.5 years. And then to really give some challenges ahead, because we do really need to think critically now, and we need to embrace multiple viewpoints in order to think critically about our challenges. So here goes. So in grade school, St. Hedwig's, it closed down to the upper grades right after I was in the 7th grade, so I went across town to St. Francis to finish up the 8th grade. My parents gave me a choice to go to the public high school down the road or take the parochial option, which is in the next city over. I chose to stay in the parochial because there were problems, and this is back in the 90s, with the public education system, and I realized that. So after a stellar baseball career in high school, I finally became turned on to academics. In my senior year, where I was offered, the teacher had to write me into an honors psychology course, and then I took one of the first courses in neuroscience that was offered in high school. And this is 1997, and one of the most brilliant things that I think the teacher did was say, I'm going to be a learner along with you all, and if you stay studying in this field, you can be an expert because very little is known. So again, back to the theme of education being an exploration into that which is not known. In the 90s, it was deemed the decade of the brain, and it's 25 years later, and well, we still have brains. So onward from high school, I found a nice university, Fairfield University, which was close enough to home so I can stay close to family as they were in their years where they were passing away. It was there that I pursued deeply the pursuit of knowledge, stopped playing baseball, and I probably count about 10 mentors from Fairfield University. One of the only things that I struggled with in my first year as I pursued philosophy and neuroscience was some of the scientists telling me that I had to drop my spiritual beliefs in order to become a true scientist. And well, I'm still here struggling with that, and I generally believe that if we turn our focus to the shared common understanding that is provided by history, that is provided by science, that is provided by story and tradition, that we would consider those things that are on the fringes merely something to try to educate each other onto. So on from there, I went to graduate school at University of California at Davis. I studied psychology, specifically perception, cognition, and cognitive neuroscience mixed with a little bit of developmental neurobiology. I was really interested in the basics of phenomenological awareness as we understand it coming through our senses, our sort of contact with this outside world, as processed through our cognitive systems, thereby sort of creating a sense of self or I'm not sure, nobody's sure, I don't think, where that all comes from, but it has something to do with your brain, right? So you want to study those mechanisms. So I did. And my dissertation built upon, of course, the shoulders of other people. And what I did is I psychophysically measured that one's perception is not always in line with their action. And that was something that I heard echoed at a talk over here on a sort of reaction to the current state of the political world, that one's beliefs aren't always in line with their action. Well, what I was looking at in graduate school was simply like our perception, our sensory processes. They present somewhat of a lens to us, and we act in response to what we sense differently from what we believe we think. Everyone, or at least everyone I measured. So I did a lot of teaching, always taking seriously the profession of teaching as also the teacher being a learner. And I think that we are seeing this big inversion in education right now, from one teacher to many students, to this idea you may have heard of personalized learning, where every student sort of has their own individual sort of path forward that's facilitated not necessarily just by a sage on the stage, but more of a guide on the side. And so I really tried to take that through as I tried to hone my own teaching skills. So while my focus, vision science, I work with the blind and visually impaired, which is quite a humbling experience to, be asked to get outside of my own dominant modes of taking in information through my eyes and more trying to understand the felt world and how I translate information. And because people up at the university, were asking me, they said, I'm going through neurodegenerative disease right now. I'm not going to have my sense of vision. How is it that I can adapt my life? And so I started to study the sense of touch, haptics, and that even broadened my understanding of our perception of the world. So I went on to take a professorship at the University of the Pacific. My focus was in biopsychology, but my favorite course was the one that nobody else wanted to teach, that we were departmentally required to have one representative teaching, and that was the freshman seminar, What is a Good Society?, where we looked at the broad questions that didn't necessarily have answers from multiple perspectives, maybe starting from the self, but broadening itself out to the family, civil society, the state, and ultimately sort of, the environment, the universe, that sort of nested sphere. And so that was very exciting. And I thought, this is going to be great. I'm going to see young learners come up through this and see how they grow. But that's not what I noticed. In the third year, one of my top students, my first year of teaching, she seemed beaten down. She seemed overwhelmed. She seemed stressed. She seemed like she was just trying to study for the next exam to pass the test, and students were coming just asking, what is on that test? And I said, I didn't write it yet because I'm not sure what we're all interested in. Let's have a conversation. No, I don't have time for that. So, I realized that most people, a lot of people in university now that come up are really, they're getting a lot of remedial work, and I actually felt, I felt like it wasn't quite right to take $40,000 of money. Of course, the professors don't get that, but and essentially teach high school. And I have been teaching motivated high school youths. I've been teaching them about cognitive neuroscience just to give back that first experience that I had with neuroscience. So I left the ivory tower. I retired. After 3 years, and so I did I often say my own master's program in education, and I in order to support myself and to make it a real thing, I started an educational company called Mind My Education. And it is a little bit of a double entendre. It's kind of, put some neuroscience, put some critical thinking, but also kind of mind my education, right? So our mission with Mind My Education is to help cultivate a compassionate society of aware, curious, and empowered learners. At first, we started trying to teach neuroscience to children, but since neuroscience was not required at the grade school level, we quickly realized that we needed to pivot business strategies and to meet people where they were at. Our sort of philosophy comes from a combination of a number of historical and very important traditions of the Greeks and the Socratic method, of our understanding of human modeling and imitation and learning through seeing, to Maria Montessori and Paulo Freire, and this whole new field of educational neuroscience. So Manuel wanted me to show one graphic, and so here it is. This was our problem that we're trying to solve. It's a graph of enthusiasm towards learning as a function of kindergarten through 12th grade. And it starts, this is summarized from thousands of individual students and teachers, and it shows it starting, it shows a graph starting at 95% in kindergarten, plummeting to about less than 50% in the 6th grade. I think that humans are naturally curious. I think we all are curious always. And so really what we had to do was to try to understand what makes learning work. Well, fortunately, there's science out there, and there are the ability to communicate learning science. We have a whole new means of communication now with the internet, and so the ability to share information is just phenomenal. Okay, so let me. So of course we are trying to provide a form of education that honors the individual, that honors the original meaning of the words. Beyond definitions, which I think we should all talk about, what I think is especially challenging is to agree upon the aims of education. What are the goals? What are the aims? And in my study of what people are talking about in the global educational policy realm, there's multiple aims. There's not just one. It's a plurality of aims. And yes, it's a philosophy pursued for its own sake. It's also about human capital and thriving together as a society as our numbers grow. It's about respecting the systems that emerge from our past interactions. And I believe it's to strive to the good in its infinite forms. There are a few points pertinent to this great time of transition that I believe we're in education and living through it. It's a really wonderful time. One is the elephant in the room. It's the internet. It has a lot on there. Although I hear it only weighs as much as a strawberry if you weighed all the electrons. So we have a change in the communication medium, and just like transportation revolutions, it will bring great change. I believe it also brings great hope, and that's something that I hold on to strongly, and a number of the people that I work with also do. There is the arousal addiction that I think a number of people have pointed to even today, that young people are spending 8+ hours on the screen, but I don't think that we shouldn't think that they're not educating themselves. In fact, they have a global audience. They can have a global audience. So I do think that there are changes that are going to come because of the internet, and already have. I think we have to take seriously, and people are starting to take seriously, people like Dr. Daniel Kahneman, Nobel laureate behavioral economics, and accounting for that difference between the perception or the imagination and the rational. Our motivational sciences, author Daniel Pink, described motivation in terms of almost like a formula. Motivation or drive equals autonomy and mastery and meaning or purpose. To motivate the young means that they have to have a number of things in place at the same time. There's a huge field of learning science which piggybacks on educational neuroscience and is part of it. We have drastically underestimated the cognitive capacity of our young people. There is a debate over what to measure and how to measure it. And that is a good chance for debate. I think another trend that I've been seeing is the realization that parents and family need to be directly involved with the education of our young people. No way is one teacher to 20 young people, 1 to 30, 1 to 40 even, going to suffice, even with educational technology in the classroom. We need to make sure that we honor the role of all of our teachers, including our parents, our neighbors, and our extended family. I think that recently there has been an embrace of heterodoxy, which is a movement towards embracing multiple viewpoints, all the while agreeing, I think, something that we commonly miss, that we mostly agree on most things. Some of those things: peace, not war; food, not starvation. And I think something that came up in the morning session a couple of times was how to facilitate that intergenerational transfer, and looking for some of those sort of basic fundamental truths. I don't have many of those, but I have one to offer for maybe a suggestion to talk about, and that is that there exists something rather than nothing. I haven't been able to entertain conversations with anybody who didn't take that as something to stand on as a platform. I do think that, I'm talking about some of the trends, and one of the trends is towards heterodoxy, both in the universities, but also, I think just in general, we're realizing that there are more points of view than a simple sort of unidimensional, say, right-left structure. I mean, at least we could bend our cognitive mechanisms into 2 dimensions. Never mind try to, embrace or try to understand what modern mathematics is telling us, that there might be dimensions past the 3 spatial and 1 temporal that we're commonly dealing with. So I think, again, going back to the overarching theme, education seems to be about an embrace of the unknown and a striving towards it, without throwing out the bathwater, the water that we're all in. Of course, everyone's probably heard of some of the movements towards school choice. I'd like to suggest that we should also be talking about instructional choice as being a real option. And so personalized learning is a thing. And I think in order for young people to really feel that power that I think everybody wants to feel, we need to allow them to hold the map to their educational future. And I think we have to make sure to keep our human element and celebrate our past traditions. It's how we got here. Another trend that I hope for, maybe more than I see, is synthesis. Instead of getting down into the silos of our individual sort of pursuits of knowledge, which is a great thing, we need to go locally, but we also often need to come out and to see the sort of more global picture. And I think that even in the science, technology, and engineering and mathematics pushes that we're seeing today, they at least put a little A in there. Has anyone heard of STEM education? Well, at least now they're putting STEAM in there, right? There's an A. So I'm focusing on the A, and that's at least a step in the right direction. And then I think a real trend that's becoming known is that the medium really is the message. And so what is the mediums that we're teaching through? Okay, so those are some of the trends I saw. Some of the challenges is, as was brought up this morning, to build from a common ground between science, art, religion, and all else that I have and have not come to even think about. To understand education in the broadest possible sense, our entire information diet. A refusal to be paralyzed and frozen in the confusion of events. Young babies, when you present them with visual illusions, they tend to look at them for longer. They embrace that which doesn't make sense. Show a baby something that's kind of not being supported, they'll be intrigued. They'll go towards it. I think that there are other natural responses to freeze in the light of confusion, to freeze in the light of things that we don't understand. Yet with the advent of quantum mechanics, something that Einstein himself helped discover but could not quite grapple his mind around, we may have to look towards different logic systems that we can program into computers that can allow for A and not A to both be held at the same time, to be able to talk about Schrodinger's cat. We know that even the basic events of nature, like photosynthesis, do require quantum action. I think one of the biggest challenges, maybe I'd even call it a danger, is nihilism. I embrace being comfortable with not knowing, and to even relax in that state, to have compassion, both self-compassion and compassion for others. I believe the word mercy was mentioned. There are many people who I believe are in the same state. I believe most of us are. I believe one of the big challenges is to tie together our perception, our understanding, our imagination, and our action, and our willingness to act in line with our beliefs. I think we do need to renew our passion for ethics, and I think this is something that only comes with deep and sustained reading and intergenerational transfer of knowledge, especially as we program algorithms that are based on the cognitive mechanisms that we're finding in our mind. I think that ethics is more important than ever. We always want to make sure that our artificial intelligence is serving our intelligence, not trying to destroy it. So I really think that we should be focusing on the overlap. One of my graduate mentors asked me, he said, how much is shared? I said, maybe 95% of stuff is shared. And we often argue, and we're brought into arguments around the fringes. And I think that those arguments are good to have, but I think we should also celebrate those 95%. He said, he says, is there a standard deviation on that number? I said, of course, it's only a guess. I said, plus or minus 7.5%. So, but I do believe that that by focusing on some of those same pieces of shared overlap, like peace, not war, food, not starvation, freedom, not oppression, we can come to a better understanding and help each other through this path as one family. Thank you.